There is one boundary, one single decision a woman makes about herself that quietly rewires how a man thinks about her. It has nothing to do with being colder, harder to reach, or playing games. It has nothing to do with tricks, timing texts, or pretending not to care when you do. It is deeper than that and stranger than that. And once you understand it, you will realize why some women are remembered for years while others are forgotten within weeks. This is not about manipulation. This is about psychology, the real researched, uncomfortable truth about how human attention and human obsession actually work. Because obsession is not built on chasing, it is built on absence of a very specific kind. Stay with me for the next few minutes because by the end of this video, you are going to understand something about your own worth that most people never figure out. Something that changes not just how men see you, but how you see yourself. And I promise you, the boundary I am about to describe is simpler than you think and harder to keep than you expect. Let's begin. Picture two women. Both are kind, both are attractive, both are emotionally intelligent, both know how to hold a conversation, both know how to make a room feel warmer just by being in it. One of them, 6 months into knowing a man, has been slowly erased from his mind, filed away as nice, a pleasant memory that doesn't return. The other, 6 months later, is still on his mind uninvited at strange hours, during meetings, in the middle of unrelated conversations. What is the difference between them? It is not beauty. It is not intelligence. It is not effort. It is one internal boundary held quietly and consistently that the second woman has and the first does not. And here is the cliffhanger because I want you to sit with this for a second before I explain it. The boundary that creates obsession is the exact opposite of what most relationship advice teaches you to do. Most advice tells you to give more, prove more, communicate more, reassure more. This boundary asks you to do almost none of that. And in a moment, I am going to tell you exactly what it is. But first, you need to understand why the human brain works this way, because without that understanding, the boundary will feel impossible to hold. Let's talk about how attention actually works in the brain, because this is where everything starts. Human beings are not wired to value what is freely given. We are wired through millions of years of evolution to value what is uncertain, what requires effort, what might be lost. This is called the scarcity principle, and it is one of the most well-documented patterns in behavioral psychology. It is why a sale that ends in 3 hours feels more urgent than a sale that never ends. It is why the last item on a shelf gets picked up first. It is why a message that comes slowly, thoughtfully, and with clear boundaries feels heavier in someone's hands than a message that arrives the instant they think of you. This is not cynicism. This is not manipulation. This is simply how the nervous system allocates attention. Certainty relaxes the brain. Uncertainty activates it. An obsession at its core is nothing more than a brain that has not been given full certainty, still working quietly in the background to resolve the gap. When a woman gives everything immediately, her time, her attention, her forgiveness, her explanations, her presence, without ever protecting any of it, she is without meaning to handing over the very uncertainty that would have kept his mind working. She becomes fully known, fully available, fully understood, and the brain cruelly stops reaching for what it already has in his hand. Now, here's where the boundary comes in, and I want you to really absorb this because it will change how you interact with people for the rest of your life. The boundary that creates obsession is this. She protects her peace before she protects the relationship. That's it. That is the whole thing. It sounds almost too simple to matter, but it is the single most psychologically powerful decision a can make because almost everything else flows from it. Protecting her peace before protecting the relationship means she does not sacrifice her sleep to reply at midnight. It means she does not cancel plans with herself to accommodate last-minute inconsistency. It means she does not explain her worth to someone who is questioning it, because explaining is a form of begging even when it's dressed up in calm language. It means she does not shrink her needs to avoid conflict, because conflict avoided today becomes resentment stored for later. This one boundary, peace before relationship, changes the entire emotional architecture of how a man experiences her. Because a woman who protects her peace cannot be fully predicted, not because she is playing games, but because she is operating from an internal compass instead of an external one. And unpredictability, when it comes from self-respect rather than manipulation, is the single most magnetic quality a human being can have. Let's slow down here because I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, isn't this just telling me to be distant, to be cold, to make him chase? No. And this is the part almost every piece of relationship advice online gets wrong. Coldness is not a boundary. Coldness is a strategy, and strategies eventually get exposed because they are performances, and performances are exhausting to maintain. A boundary is not something you do to someone. A boundary is something you hold for yourself, regardless of whether anyone is watching, regardless of whether it works. A woman with a real boundary is not thinking, if I don't text back for 3 hours, he'll want me more. A woman with a real boundary is thinking, I don't reply to texts while I'm in the middle of something that matters to me because my time is not something I abandon the second someone else wants it. Do you see the difference? One is manipulation dressed as self-respect. The other is self-respect that happens to look from the outside like something strategic. Men can feel the difference even if they can't always name it. They can feel when a woman's calm is performed for effect, and they can feel when a woman's calm comes from somewhere real inside her. Only one of those is magnetic. Only one of those lasts. Here's something almost nobody talks about, and it's the part of this video I most want you to remember. Obsession is not built through excitement. It is built through relief. This sounds backwards, so let me explain. In a world full of noise, inconsistency, people who say one thing and do another, people who love bomb you for 2 weeks and disappear for 2, a person who is emotionally consistent, who has clear boundaries, who does not collapse under pressure or dissolve into anxiety when things go quiet, that person becomes a kind of psychological safe harbor. And safety, contrary to what dating culture tells you, is not boring. Safety is rare. Safety is, in a strange and counterintuitive way, the most addictive thing a human nervous system can experience because most of us have spent our lives without much of it. When a man meets a woman who has this boundary, who will not abandon her own peace to keep him comfortable, something happens in his mind that he may not even be able to explain to himself. He relaxes, and then, almost immediately after relaxing, something else happens. He starts to wonder if he can keep her. Because a woman who does not need him to complete her sense of safety is a woman whose presence feels like a gift rather than an obligation. And gifts, unlike obligations, are things people fear losing. Let's talk about what happens on the other side. What happens when this boundary is missing? Because understanding the absence makes the presence make more sense. A woman without this boundary often mistakes intensity for connection. She feels more in love the more anxious she becomes because her nervous system has been trained, sometimes since childhood, to associate anxiety with attachment. She checks her phone. She messages looking for hidden meaning. She apologizes first, even when she wasn't wrong, because keeping the peace has become more important than keeping her boundaries. And here's the tragic irony. The more she does this, the less magnetic she becomes. Not because she is unworthy, but because she has unintentionally removed all the psychological tension that made her presence feel valuable in the first place. She has become fully solved. And the human brain, again and again, in study after study, does not obsess over things that are fully solved. It obsesses over things that remain slightly, respectfully, healthily out of reach. Not because they are withheld cruelly, but because they belong to someone who has a life, a rhythm, and a self that does not revolve entirely around being chosen. I want to give you a real, relatable picture of what this boundary looks like in daily life, because theory is useless without application. Imagine a woman who has had a long day. Someone she is seeing texts her something dismissive, something that stings a little, the kind of small comment that used to send her into a spiral of overthinking. The old version of her would reply immediately, defensively, explaining herself, trying to smooth things over before the discomfort even had time to breathe. The version of her who holds this boundary does something different. She notices the sting. She lets it exist without rushing to fix it. She finishes what she was doing, her dinner, her show, her conversation with a friend, and she replies later. Not out of punishment, but because her evening was never something she was willing to hand over to someone else's carelessness. That's it. That's the whole boundary played out in one ordinary moment. No games, no scripts, no manipulation. Just a woman who has decided that her peace is not a bargaining chip. And that decision, repeated in 1,000 small moments, is what eventually makes her unforgettable. Now, I want to talk about something psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect, because it explains almost perfectly why this boundary creates such long-lasting obsession. The Zeigarnik effect is the finding that the human brain remembers unfinished experiences far more vividly than finished ones. Waiters famously remember unpaid orders better than paid ones. The moment the bill is settled, the memory fades. This is true of almost everything in human cognition, including relationships. A woman who gives everything, explains everything, resolves every tension immediately, closes every open loop, she becomes, cognitively speaking, a finished experience. There is nothing left for the mind to return to. But a woman who holds boundaries, who does not over-explain, who allows some things to remain slightly unresolved without ever being cruel or withholding, leaves open loops in the mind of the person experiencing her. And open loops, whether we like it or not, are what the brain keeps returning to at 2 o'clock in the morning, in the shower, in the middle of a work meeting, when it should be thinking about something else entirely. This is not about being difficult. This is about not over-explaining your worth to someone who should be paying attention closely enough to see it for himself. Let's go deeper into why so many women struggle to hold this boundary. Because understanding the obstacle is half of overcoming it. Most of us were not taught growing up that our peace mattered more than being liked. We were taught the opposite. We were taught to be agreeable, to smooth things over, to make ourselves smaller in rooms so that others could feel more comfortable. We were taught that a good woman is one who explains herself patiently, forgives quickly, and never makes anyone feel bad, even when they've made her feel small. And so, when it comes time to hold a boundary, a real one, not a performative one, it can feel almost physically uncomfortable, like we are doing something wrong, even cruel. This discomfort is not a sign that the boundary is wrong. It is a sign that the boundary is new. Anything the body has not practiced feels unnatural at first, even things that are deeply, obviously good for us. The woman who finally learns to protect her peace before the relationship will feel guilty the first few times she does it. That guilt is not a warning sign. It is evidence of growth. Here's another layer to this that most people miss entirely. This boundary does not just affect how a man sees you, it affects how you see yourself. And that internal shift is actually the real engine behind everything external. When a woman begins protecting her peace, something happens inside her long before it happens in the relationship. She starts to trust herself more. She starts to notice that the world does not end when she doesn't reply instantly. She starts to notice that people who truly value her do not disappear when she has needs. And people who do disappear were never staying for her in the first place. They were staying for her availability. This internal shift changes her posture, her voice, the way she enters a room. And here is the part that ties everything together. Men are not actually falling for a boundary in the abstract. Rather, they're falling for the version of a woman who exists on the other side of holding it. Calmer, steadier, less desperate for approval, more rooted in herself. The boundary is the doorway. Self-respect is the room on the other side of it. And self-respect, more than any boundary technique, is what obsession is actually built on. I want to address something directly because I don't want this video to be misunderstood. This is not about withholding love to manipulate someone into wanting you more. Manipulation always collapses eventually because it is built on performance, and performance cannot be sustained forever. What I am describing is the opposite of manipulation. It is authenticity with a spine. It is warmth that has limits. It is generosity that does not come at the cost of self-abandonment. A woman who holds this boundary is not less loving. She is often more loving because she is not depleting herself into resentment. Resentment, not boundaries, is what actually kills relationships. And resentment is built brick by brick every time a woman crosses her own limits to keep someone else comfortable. The boundary I'm describing prevents that resentment from ever forming because it is set early, held consistently, and communicated not through arguments, but through action. Let's talk about consistency, because this is where most women lose the thread. It is one thing to hold a boundary once in a moment of clarity, maybe after a video like this one. It is another thing entirely to hold it on a random Tuesday 3 months into a relationship, when you're tired, when you miss him, when part of you just wants to collapse the distance and pour everything out at once. That is the real test. Obsession is not created by one dramatic moment of self-respect. It is created by the slow, unglamorous accumulation of 1,000 small moments where a woman shows herself quietly, without announcement, without needing credit for it. This is why so few women actually hold this boundary long term. Not because they don't understand it, but because consistency requires something advice videos rarely talk about: patience with your own progress. You will slip. You will send a text you shouldn't have sent. You will explain yourself when you didn't need to. That does not undo the pattern. What matters is the overall direction, not a single moment of weakness. Now, let's talk about something a little uncomfortable, because I think you deserve the full truth, not just the flattering parts. This boundary does not work on everyone, and it is not supposed to. Some men, particularly those who are only interested in ease, in low-effort attention, in relationships that ask nothing of them, will simply leave when a woman starts protecting her peace. And here is the truth that stings a little, but sets you free. Those men were never going to be obsessed with you anyway. They were obsessed with your availability, which is a very different thing from being obsessed with you. Losing that kind of attention is not a loss. It is a filter. The boundary does not manufacture obsession out of nothing. It reveals which kind of attention was ever real in the first place. Some men will fade when the boundary appears. The ones who don't fade, the ones who lean in, who become more curious, more attentive, more invested, those are the ones capable of the kind of depth this video is actually about. Let's talk for a moment about the biology underneath all of this, because it makes the whole thing feel less like folklore and more like fact. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter most associated with desire and craving, is not released most strongly at the moment of reward. It is released most strongly during anticipation, during the gap between wanting and having. This has been shown again and again in behavioral neuroscience research. Most famously in studies on variable reinforcement, where unpredictable rewards create far stronger behavioral loops than predictable ones. This is the same mechanism behind gambling, behind social media notifications, behind the particular ache of waiting for a reply that hasn't come yet. A woman who holds boundaries, who does not offer total predictability, who remains partially, helpfully, outside of full certainty, is unintentionally activating this exact anticipatory system in the mind of someone who is paying attention to her. Not through games, through simply being a full person with the life that does not orbit entirely around him. This is not something you need to engineer. It is something that happens automatically the moment you stop overgiving and start living fully with or without his attention. I want to bring this back to something deeply human, because I don't want you to walk away from this thinking it's all just brain chemistry and psychological tricks. At its core, this boundary is about believing you are worth waiting for, worth respecting, worth showing up consistently for, and refusing to accept less than that, even quietly, even when no one is watching, even when it would be easier to lower the bar just this once. That belief is not something you fake into existence by reading a script or memorizing a rule. It is something you build moment by moment, choice by choice, every time you choose your peace over the temporary comfort of being chosen. And the strange, beautiful truth is that the moment you start doing this consistently, not to attract anyone, but because you finally believe you deserve it, that is the exact moment when attraction, real attraction, the kind that doesn't fade after a few weeks, tends to arrive, not because you were trying to create it, because you finally stopped auditioning for it. Let's talk about how this shows up specifically in communication, because so much of this boundary lives in the small, ordinary exchanges we have every day. It shows up in not sending a 3-paragraph explanation when a 1-line answer would do. It shows up in not apologizing for having plans, for needing space, for wanting to think before responding to something important. It shows up in saying, I need some time to process this. And actually taking that time, instead of caving the moment, the silence starts to feel uncomfortable. It shows up in not fishing for reassurance through indirect hints, but stating clearly what you need. And then respecting yourself enough to notice whether that need is being met. Communication rooted in this boundary is not cold or clipped. It is honest, direct, and unafraid of silence. And silence used this way is not punishment. It is simply space. Space that a healthy connection needs to breathe, and space that an anxious, over-explained connection never gets the chance to have. There is one more piece of this puzzle I have to mention, because without it, everything else in this video risks sounding like a technique rather than a truth. This boundary only works, really works, sustainably, in a way that builds something lasting rather than something fragile when it is paired with genuine warmth. A boundary without warmth becomes a wall, and walls do not create obsession. They create distance that eventually turns into indifference.